By 9:30 that Saturday morning, I had sold, for $131, almost everything that would have kept 5 people alive that winter. I know the exact figure because I wrote the sales on the back of a feed store envelope, the way Dana used to, and I still have the envelope. A Coleman 2-burner stove, $4. 2 gray wool blankets from her father's service days, $3 each. A pressure canner, $10. The chest freezer in the garage, $60, and the man who bought it brought his own dolly. 4 food-grade water jugs, $2 apiece. All 4 to the same woman, who did not haggle and did not explain. A kerosene heater with a cracked wick knob, $15. 2 blue polytarps, $1. A chainsaw that needed a chain, $25, sold to a man who never took his gloves off. The photograph was in a shoebox in the free pile, under a jar of mismatched buttons. My name is Marvin Ostland. Everybody has called me Marv since I was 9. I keep the books for a company that owns 3 car washes and a coin laundry in Arvid, in Pelto County, in the flat, wet north end of Minnesota where the fields are black and the ditches are older than the roads. I am 58. I have no children. I am not handy. I can tell you to the dollar what a stall of vacuums earns in February, and I cannot back a trailer, and until that November I had never in my life started a fire outdoors on purpose. Dana died 14 months before the sale. She was 55. She was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee pot on a Tuesday morning, and then she was on the floor and there was nothing anybody could have done, and I have had 2 doctors and 1 very kind funeral director tell me that, and I believe them, and it has never once helped. She was a home health aide, 18 years, mostly rural routes, 3 townships and change, 60 to 140 miles a day, depending on who was still living where. She left the house at 6:40 in the morning and came home at 4, and she talked about her days the way people talk about weather, which is to say, in summary, Mrs. Aho's furnace. The Sunquist boy finally got his license. The road out to Ditch 9 is soft again. I listened the way you listen to somebody you expect to hear talk for another 30 years. That is the whole shape of what happened to me, honestly. I had a wife for 29 years and I knew maybe a fifth of her life, and I did not find out how small a fifth it was until it was the only thing I had left to search. The yard sale was my sister-in-law's idea, and then it was my idea, and then it was a fight. Bev Curti is Dana's older sister, 63, retired from running the school kitchen, bad left hip, hair she still sets herself, and the kind of face that does not soften just because a room wants it to. She had been at me since spring about the house, not to sell it, just to move through it. Her word. Move through it. In October, I finally said yes, and then she found out I intended to put Dana's mother's dishes on a folding table with a sign that said $5 all, and we did not speak for 9 days. We compromised. The dishes stayed. Everything else went on the lawn. It was cold that morning, 31 degrees at 6:40, a skin of ice on the bird bath and frost on the seats of the folding chairs. Rain was supposed to come in around 4 and turn to sleet after dark, and I had told Bev the whole thing would be off my grass before that. That was the plan. Tables out by 7, sale from 8 to 2, haul the leavings to the thrift store in Arvid before it closed, and eat supper at her place because she was making the hot dish with the tater tots, and I had said yes without thinking about how it would feel to eat it. The first buyers pulled in at 6:55. Now, I have lived in that house on the edge of town for 22 years, and I have seen a fair number of yard sales, and yes, there are people who show up early. There is a woman who does the estate sales in 3 counties, and she is always first, and she always asks about jewelry. She was there, fine. But by 7:30 there were 11 vehicles on the shoulder of Birch Street, and by 8 there were more than 20, and people were parking in the church lot across the road, and it was 31 degrees on the second Saturday of November, which is not yard sale weather in that part of the world. It is the weekend everybody's putting their ducks in the garage and driving to the Roseau tournament. They did not want the jewelry. Nobody asked me about the jewelry. They wanted the stove. They wanted the blankets and the canner and the jugs and the tarps and the chainsaw and the 2 cases of empty canning jars I had priced at $1 because I honestly thought I'd end up hauling them off myself. A man in a Carhartt coat with Pennington County plates on his truck asked if I had chimney pipe. 20 minutes later, a different man, a stranger, asked me the same thing. Do you have any stovepipe? Any 6-inch pipe? And I said no, sorry. And he stood there a second longer than the answer deserved, looking past me at the garage. And then he said, thanks anyway, and got in his truck. People paid cash and did not count it slowly. One woman bought all 4 water jugs and asked, very politely, whether I had more in the basement. She had a hospital lanyard tucked into her collar. I remember thinking she must be on her way to a shift. Here is the detail I keep. The man who bought the chainsaw would not take his gloves off. It was cold, so that's nothing, but he counted out $25 through the fingers of insulated work gloves. Dropped to 5. Picked it up with both hands like it was heavier than it was. And when he said the chain's shot on this, you know that. His voice came out wrecked, hoarse, scraped. Like a man who'd spent the night yelling at a hockey game. I said, that's why it's 25. He laughed and it sounded terrible and he said, going around, and he touched his own throat, and he put the saw in his back seat and left. The next person in line was a woman I knew slightly from the credit union, buying the wool blankets. And when she said good morning, her voice did the same thing. 2 people, 10 feet apart, sounding like they'd both been shouting all night. Going around. That's what everybody said all day. It's going around. My grandkids brought it home. Whole 3rd grades got it. The clinic slammed. There's something going around. That's the first thing I got wrong, and it wasn't dramatic, and there was no siren attached to it. 2 hoarse voices at a yard sale. If somebody had told me at 8 in the morning that I was watching the first hour of the worst thing that would ever happen to this country, I'd have said you should have your head looked at. And then I'd have sold you a kerosene heater for $15. Charmaine Odell came at 9:40, after her Saturday visits, still in her scrubs under a parka. Charmaine ran the same route as Dana for 6 years, 2 aides splitting a territory the size of a small state. She is 51. She drives a Buick with 240,000 miles on it, and she is the only person who ever made me feel better at the funeral because she didn't say anything. She stood next to me and looked at the flowers and said, well, this is a lot of carnations, and I laughed for the first time in 9 days. She looked at the lawn and said, Marv, there's nothing left. They cleaned me out. I can see that. She was turning in a slow circle, and I watched her stop turning. She was looking at the road, at the parked cars, at a man loading a plastic barrel into a minivan. Huh, she said. Then she found the shoebox. It was in the free pile because I had gone through it in September and it was all doubles and blurry ones and photographs of buildings. And I had made a decision that I regret in a way that has nothing to do with survival. I decided that the pictures Dana took were not pictures of anything. She took pictures constantly. Cheap drugstore prints, 4x6 with a white border, dated on the edge by the machine at the pharmacy in Arvid. Not people mostly. Ice on a fence line. A tamarack that had gone gold. Somebody's kitchen table with the light coming across it. A dog on a porch. I used to tease her about the envelopes coming back from the developer. 36 pictures of a ditch. Charmaine sat down in a frost-cold lawn chair with the box in her lap and went through the whole thing, and every so often she'd say a name. Oh, that's Alma. That's the Sunquist's barn before the wind took it. Oh, honey, that's her car. And then she stopped, and she held one up, and she said, Where is this? It was Dana in an orange safety vest over her winter coat, snow on the ground, squinting because the sun was low behind whoever was holding the camera. Her hair was shorter, so it was a while back. She was standing to the left of a concrete face built into a hillside, except there are no hills out there, so it wasn't a hillside. It was a mound, a long, low bank of dirt and dead grass with a concrete wall poking out of the end of it like the front of a bunker. There was a steel door, painted a red that had gone chalky. Above the door, somebody had stenciled a number I couldn't read in the print. Off to the right, A rusted pipe came out of the top of the mound with a little peaked cap on it. And in the bottom corner of the frame, mostly out of it, there was the sleeve of a man's coat and part of a hand. "That's a root day," Charmaine said. "That vest, that's what we wore November to March so the plow guys could see us in a yard. She's working in that picture." She turned it over. Nothing on the back. Dana never wrote on the back. The date stamp on the border said 106. "So it's somebody's place," I said. "It's somebody's place," she agreed, and put it in her coat pocket without asking. And I let her, and that was the end of it for 4 days. By noon, the lawn was bare, and the rain came early. At 2, and I stood in my kitchen with $131 on the counter and the strange light feeling you get when a house stops being full. I ate the hot dish at Bev's. She said the sale went well, and I said it went too well. She said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "I don't know, Bev, it went weird." And she said, "Everybody's stocking up for winter, Marvin. That's what people do here." And that was the end of that, too. Sunday, 2 of Saturday's buyers came back. The first one knocked at 8 in the morning, a guy about 40, and asked if I had anything else. Anything at all. Propane bottles, batteries, a generator, a pump, canned goods. I said the sale was yesterday. He said he knew. He'd been here. He bought the tarps. He said he'd pay more than yesterday's price for anything I had left, and I said I didn't have anything left, and he looked at my truck. "You selling that?" "No. I'll give you $4,000 cash." It was a 2011 Silverado with 190,000 miles and a rear tire I'd been meaning to deal with since August. "It's not worth $4,000, I said. "I know," he said. He didn't argue. He just stood in my driveway for a second in the drizzle, and then he thanked me and left. His voice was fine. His voice was completely normal, and I want to say that because it's important that the fear did not arrive with a sound effect. He was just a man doing arithmetic that I hadn't started yet. The second one came at 4, and I didn't answer the door. Monday, the school district canceled through Wednesday. The letter said elevated absence rates among staff. Monday afternoon, the co-op in Arvid was out of 20-pound propane bottles, and the girl at the counter said the truck was coming Thursday, and by Tuesday she said she didn't know about the truck. Tuesday, Charmaine called me from her car and said her agency had canceled all non-essential visits and told the aides to do phone checks, which is a thing that does not exist for a 91-year-old who cannot hear a phone. "So, what are you doing?" I said. There was a long pause with the road noise in it. "I'm going," she said. "Obviously I'm going. The hospital in the regional city stopped taking transfers on Wednesday. That's a small thing that most people didn't hear about, and it is the single clearest signal I can point to in the whole first week. Ambulance out of Arvid took a man with chest pain and had to drive him 90 minutes the other direction. And the crew talked about it at the gas station, and the story got around town in about 4 hours the way it does. Nobody said outbreak. The word people use that week was situation. There's a situation at the hospital. There's a situation down at Bemidji. Thursday, the state put out a notice about avoiding unnecessary travel in the Northwest region and recommending that people with symptoms remain at home and not present to emergency departments. Remain at home. Do not present. My mother's generation would have read that in about 9 seconds and started filling jars. I read it twice and went to work, because it was the 11th, and I closed the books on the 10th. I want to be honest about the denial, because I think that's the useful part. I did not think it was nothing. I thought it was serious and far away and slow. My whole professional life is a small monthly rhythm receipts, payroll, the water bill. The same 11 line items, and there is a kind of person that rhythm makes. I kept thinking about it in terms of when it would be over. I caught myself at my desk on Thursday afternoon, wondering if the December numbers would be bad. Lyle Barron next door was ahead of me, and Lyle is 71 and drags an oxygen bottle around the yard some days. He'd worked 26 years at the mill, and he'd been through 2 long strikes and 1 flood. And he had the flatbed F350 he used to haul his snowmobile, and a chest freezer of venison, and about 900 feet of extension cord, for no reason anyone could establish. Thursday night he came over and stood in my kitchen with his hat on, which meant he wasn't staying, and said, Did you sell that Coleman stove? Saturday, I said. Who to? I don't know, Lyle. A guy. He nodded slowly. He said, I'd have bought that off you, and left. Friday morning, I got in the truck with $131 and $200 more out of the coffee can, and I went and tried to buy my own things back. It sounds ridiculous. It felt ridiculous while I was doing it. But small towns are small, and I'd recognized enough faces. And the woman who bought the 4 water jugs had a hospital lanyard, and there is exactly one hospital. And I had the estate sale lady's number because she'd been trying to get at Dana's mother's dishes for a year. I got 2 of the wool blankets back. A retired teacher named Ione had bought them, and she looked at me for a long moment on her step, and then she said, You want them back? Yes. $6, she said, which is exactly what I charged her. And when I tried to hand her 20, she made a face like I'd spit on her floor. Marv Ostland, $6. I did not get the stove back. I did not get the canner or the jugs or the freezer. 2 houses didn't answer. 1 address I couldn't find. At the 4th stop, out past the elevator, a woman opened the door 6 inches with the chain on and said her husband wasn't home and she couldn't help me. And behind her, a voice said something hoarse that I couldn't make out, and she closed the door. I sat in my truck outside that house for a while. That was the afternoon it stopped being a situation for me. Not a news alert, not a body in a street, a chain on a door and a hoarse voice in a hallway, and a woman with her hands shaking on the door frame. I went home and I called Charmaine and she didn't answer, and I called Bev and she did. I want you to come stay here, I said. Why? Because you're on the 3rd floor over a laundromat with electric heat and a bad hip. My hip is fine. Bev. Marvin, if you're going to be dramatic, I'd rather you did it after the weekend. She came Sunday. She brought 2 suitcases, her mother's dishes, which she had apparently repossessed from my own basement at some point without telling me, an ancient beagle named Peanut, who was already 14 and had opinions, and a printed list of everything she thought I'd done wrong since her sister's funeral, which she did not read out loud, but which I could feel in the room. Charmaine came Sunday night too, because her landlord's building lost power and she wasn't going to sit in the dark. She brought the shoebox. That's how the search started. Not with a revelation. With 3 tired people at a kitchen table on a Sunday night, and a woman putting a photograph face up between the coffee cups and saying, I keep thinking about this. It's a picture of a hill, Bev said. It's not a hill, Charmaine said. There's no hill. It's a spud cellar. I said, a what? Trina Voss said it too. 3 days later, the exact same words, and she's the one who made it real, so let me bring her in. Trina bought my chest freezer. 38, cuts hair in a shop attached to her house on the south edge of town. Grew up on a farm out by Ditch 14. She came back Monday with a trailer because the freezer wouldn't fit in the van the first time, and she found the 3 of us in the kitchen arguing over a photograph. And she looked at it over my shoulder and said, Oh, that's a potato house. There used to be a lot of them. When the peat ground out east of Arvid got drained in the 60s and 70s, a co-op went in and a bunch of guys tried potatoes on it, and they poured these long concrete rooms and bulldozed dirt over the top for the insulation. Frost never gets down through 4 feet of dirt. Big steel doors, vent shafts on top, and inside it's 40-some degrees all winter without a single thing burning. The potato business out there died before I moved to the county. Some got knocked down. Some got used for equipment. Some just sat there with the willow growing up over them until they looked like nothing at all. There's one on the Bergstrom place, Trina said. Big one. You can see it from 61. Bev said, So? I didn't say anything, because I was doing the thing that I would keep doing for the next 2 weeks, and I want to name it plainly. I was looking at a photograph of my wife standing in front of a concrete door, and inside my chest something had gone bright and stupid and warm, and it was saying, she found this. She was showing me this. She left me this. She didn't. That's not what happened. But I want you to understand that from Monday the 10th to the day we walked in, some part of me was following her out of the room. The 4 of us drove out to the Bergstrom place on Tuesday. Understand what the roads were like by then. Not chaos, emptier than usual, and then, all at once, not empty at all. Highway 32 North had a soft closure, which meant 2 sawhorses and a county pickup, and a guy who told you the state had asked people not to travel and then let you through if you said you were going home. The gas station on the north end was closed, with paper on the windows. The co-op still had fuel and had gone cash only on Saturday, and then back to cards on Monday, which was the strangest part of that whole week. Systems flickering on and off like a bulb with a bad socket. Cell data was slow. Texts went through in clumps, 3 at once, 40 minutes late. The county's parcel viewer, the online map where you can look up who owns what, was down. It stayed down. I want to note that, because 100 years of property records were sitting in a courthouse 11 miles from me, and I could not get at any of it, and neither could anybody else. And it made the land around us anonymous in a way I had never once considered. The Bergstrom potato house was right where Trina said. You could see it from the road, a long dirt mound with concrete showing at the end, maybe 80 feet of it. There was a gravel approach and a yard with 2 grain bins and a house. There was a car parked across the approach, nose out, and a man standing beside it. He wasn't hostile. He held up one hand, flat, the way you'd stop traffic. Lyle stopped the flatbed 40 yards out, and we rolled the window down, and the man called across the distance that they were full up. Those were his words. We're full up. There were kids' bikes in the yard. There were 3 other vehicles. Somebody had cut the willow back and stacked it, so they'd been there a few days at least. Trina said, "Is that Denny Bergstrom's boy?" "Don't," said Lyle. And out past the man, at the corner of the mound, there was a person standing in the dead grass, facing the dirt bank. Just standing. Not moving. Nobody in that yard was looking at them, which told me more than the standing did. We backed out. On the way, we caught the shoulder wrong, and I heard the tire go. And it was the rear tire I'd been meaning to deal with since August. And we spent 50 minutes on County 61 in the wind changing it. And Lyle had to sit down twice. And Bev held the lug nuts in her coat pocket because there was nowhere to set them down. And that was the first day. That's the honest texture of it. We did not have a montage. We had a flat tire and a man saying we're full up and $40 of diesel gone. Wednesday, I found out that Wendell Kowalchuk was still alive. Charmaine did it, not me. She went back through the shoebox and found 4 more prints with the same look to them: winter, low sun, a farmyard, and in one of them there was an old man in a red plaid coat holding a coffee can. And she said, "That's Wendell. That's him. He was Dinah's, not mine, Tuesdays and Fridays." And she looked at the coat sleeve in the corner of the potato house picture and said, "That's the same coat." Wendell Kowalchuk was 91, and he was at Larchwood, the care home on the west side of Arvid. We drove over Wednesday afternoon, and we did not get inside, because Larchwood had gone to no visitors the previous Thursday, and there was a folding table across the front entry, and a sign in a plastic sleeve. But Charmaine knew the aide working the door, a woman named Pilar, and Pilar knew Donna, and I stood outside in the cold and watched 2 women who had watched other people's parents for 20 years have a whole conversation in about 9 sentences. They brought Wendell to the window in the day room, and Pilar held her own phone to his ear, and I stood on the sidewalk with mine and talked to a man I had never met about a photograph he was in the corner of. He was very hard to talk to. He kept telling me about his brother's truck. He asked me twice whether the man was coming about the culvert. Then Charmaine took my phone and said, "Wendell, it's Dana's friend, Charmaine, from the agency." And his voice changed completely, and he said, "Oh, Donna," in this soft, pleased way, and I had to walk about 10 feet off and stand there for a minute. Charmaine asked him about the potato house, and Wendell said, and I heard it over the speaker, and I have thought about the order of these 3 sentences maybe 1,000 times since. He said, "The Bergstroms had the big one." He said, "Ours was small." He said, "It took water in the spring. Dad quit using it in '79, ruined a whole crop, and he sat down on the step and he swore, and my mother heard him from the house." I heard all 3, I was standing on a sidewalk in a wind out of the northwest with my hands in my pockets, and I heard all 3 sentences, and the only one that went in was the second one. Ours. There was another one. I asked him where, and he told me about his brother's truck again. Pilar came back on and said his daughter was in Grand Forks, and she didn't know if she could reach her, and then she said, very quietly, "We've got 11 residents with it. They came Monday and took 2, and they haven't come back." And Charmaine said, "Are you staying?" And Pilar said, "There's nobody else." And that was the last time either of us talked to her. Trina's mother had the plat books, not the counties, the old commercial ones. The atlases they sell at the fair with everybody's name printed on their 40 acres. 2 of them, 1998 and 2011. Kowalchuk was in the 98 book, section 22, out east of town past where the ground goes to Pete, on a road called Ditch 9 Grade. Kowalchuk was not in the 11 book. The 40 had been split and sold, and the name printed on it was a limited liability company out of Fargo. And the road. This is the part that took us 2 more days to understand. The road wasn't in the 11 book either. Not as a road. There was a dotted line and no number. The county vacated 1.5 miles of Ditch 9 Grade in 2003. That's a real thing that happens all the time out there. Nobody lived on it. The township didn't want to maintain it, so they gave it up, and it stopped being a public road and started being a dirt bank between 2 ditches that belonged to whoever owned the land on either side. It came off the map, not hidden by anybody, just misfiled, the way a whole place can be, when the last person who had a reason to drive down it stops driving. That's what hidden means out there. It doesn't mean somebody buried treasure. It means the paperwork moved on. Thursday, we tried to get to it and failed. Lyle drove because it was his truck and because he had gotten quiet and stubborn in a way that I understood. We took 61 east to the Ditch 14 crossing and then north on a township road that was gravel for 2 miles and then grass. And then Lyle stopped, because in front of us there was a stretch about the length of a football field where the grade had slumped and the water on both sides had come across it. And the whole thing was a black pudding of peat and standing water with a skim of ice that wouldn't hold a cat. Peat doesn't freeze the way dirt does. It holds water like a sponge, and it lets go of heat slowly. And until you get a real hard run of cold, 10 days of it, it stays soft under a crust that looks exactly like ground. We walked it. That was my idea. Lyle stayed with the truck because he'd already used his good air for the day. And Trina and Charmaine and I went out along the edge of the grade for a 1/4 mile, and I put my right leg into the knee in water that was 34 degrees, and Trina hauled me out by the coat, and Bev, who had insisted on coming and was standing on the tailgate with the binoculars from Lyle's glove box. Bev cut her hand. That's it. That's the whole injury. She was steadying herself on the corner of Lyle's flatbed, and there's a piece of angle iron there where he'd bolted on a receiver, and it caught the meat below her left thumb and opened about 1.5 inches of it. She said a word I had never heard her say. Charmaine cleaned it in the truck with a bottle of water and the first aid kit out of the toolbox, and she looked at it a long time and she said, "That should have stitches." And Bev said, "Well," and that was the end of the discussion. I drove home with a soaked pant leg freezing to my shin, and I was, God help me, happy, because I had seen it. Out past where I went in, maybe 500 yards, on the north side of the grade, there was a rise in the willow that was too straight and too long to be willow. That night was the fight. Bev had her hand wrapped up on a cushion. Lyle was in the recliner with his eyes closed. Trina was on her phone trying to get a text out to her sister in Duluth. Charmaine was at the sink. Bev said the arena. The county had opened the arena in Arvid Tuesday, the hockey rink, because it's the biggest building in town with a kitchen and bathrooms, and by Thursday there were something like 200 people in it, and the sheriff's department had 2 deputies there, and they were doing what they could. And what they could do was hand out water and put people on cots and ask them to wear a mask and keep the doors shut. There were signs up asking anyone with symptoms to stay to the West End. That was the whole plan. The West End. "They've got heat," Bev said. "They've got a generator. There's a nurse. There's 200 people breathing on each other. Charmaine said, not turning around. There's food. For how long? And I said, there's a building out there with 4 feet of dirt on top of it, and a door that locks, and it stays 40 degrees all winter without burning a thing, and nobody in this county knows it exists. And Bev turned her head and looked at me and said, you want it to be there because she's in the picture. Nobody said anything for a while. That's not fair, Charmaine said finally. It isn't, Bev said. I'm not a fair person this week. She shifted her hand on the cushion. Marvin, look at me. I loved her too. I knew her 30 years longer than you did, and she is not out there in the weeds waiting to put a roof over your head. I know that. Do you? Bev, I said. The county road commissioner erased that road in 2003. That's not Dana. That's the county board. It was a good line, and it was true, and it was not an honest answer. And she knew it, and she let it go. And I let her let it go. And that is the closest I came to catching myself in time. Here is what I have decided since, for whatever it's worth. There is a kind of grief that looks exactly like planning. It has spreadsheets in it. It gets up early. It seems, from outside, like the most functional thing in the room. And the tell is that it cannot tolerate a second option. Bev had a second option, and it was a bad one, and I would not put it on the table next to mine for even one evening. We spent Friday and Saturday getting ready and getting cold. The freeze came in Thursday night, and it was the real thing, clear hard, wind out of the northwest, 8 degrees Saturday morning, and it didn't get above 19 for 6 days. That's what we needed. Pete needs a real run at it. Every night it froze deeper, and every morning the crust would carry a little more. We put things in the truck and took them out again. It's very unglamorous, packing for something you don't know the shape of. Blankets. Ione's 2 blankets. Every sleeping bag in 3 households. All the canned goods out of 4 pantries, which came to less than I expected and included a truly stupid amount of pumpkin. Lyle's venison, in coolers, which was fine because outdoors was a freezer now. 2 of Trina's 5-gallon gas cans. Lyle's 4-wheeler with the plastic utility sled. 4 flashlights, 2 lanterns, and every LYM. A and D battery in the drawer of every kitchen we had access to, which is the single thing I would tell anyone to think harder about, because it turned out to be the resource we ran out of first and the one nobody ever puts on a list. A hatchet, a bow saw, and Lyle's chainsaw, which was not the chainsaw I'd sold, because Lyle Barron had his own and it worked. A little weather radio, the kind that runs on batteries and picks up the automated National Weather Service broadcast. Trina brought that. She said her dad kept one in the barn. Lyle brought a barrel stove kit he'd had in his shed since 1994 and stovepipe. 6-inch stovepipe. I thought about the 2 men at my yard sale asking me about chimney pipe, and I understood, standing in Lyle's shed on a Saturday in November, that those 2 men had been about 9 days ahead of me, and had probably not been any smarter, just poorer and closer to the edge, and therefore more used to thinking about heat. We went Monday the 24th. There was no dramatic moment that made us go. Sunday night the power went out on the whole east side of Arvid, and came back at 3 in the morning and went out again at 9, and the co-op had no fuel, and the sheriff's department stopped answering the non-emergency line, and Charmaine came back from a visit. She was still doing visits. She did visits for 11 days after her agency ceased to exist as a functioning organization. And she came in the back door and sat down on the step with her coat on and didn't take her boots off. And I said, "Charmaine," and she said, "I'm not going back out there." We put what we could on the flatbed and drove to the end of the township road at 4 in the morning in the dark, because the cold was hardest then and the ground was best. Lyle got the truck about a half-mile past where we'd stopped on Thursday. Then we ferried on the 4-wheeler with the sled, 500 pounds at a time in the dark, 7 trips, and then we walked, and it took until 11 in the morning. And Bev walked the last 1.25 miles on a hip that had been scheduled for replacement in March. I found it by the vent pipe. That's the truth. There was fog coming off the ditch pools at first light, and the willow was as tall as my chest, and I walked past the corner of the thing twice. And then I saw a rusted pipe with a little peaked cap standing 3 feet out of a hummock of dead grass. And I stopped, and I put my hand on the pipe, and it was the only moment in the entire month that felt the way I had wanted it to feel. Then we cut the willow off the front of it and got the doors open, and it was not what I had imagined at all. The photograph shows a face. It shows a concrete wall and a red steel door and a mound behind it going back further than the frame and what I had built in my head for 2 weeks. At a kitchen table at 3 in the morning. In the truck was a room the size of the arena. It was 22 feet wide and about 50 long. There were 2 doors, an outer steel one and an inner wooden one 4 feet in, with the space between them like an airlock. The concrete floor sloped down toward the back, on purpose, the way they built them, and at the back 30 feet the roof had let go, not fallen in, but sagged where a laminated beam had rotted at the wall pocket, and the dirt had come down in a long slump, and the last 12 feet of the room was a mound of black earth and old snow and about 4 inches of standing water with ice on it. It smelled like a root cellar and a wet dog in the underside of a dock. There were about 60 wooden potato crates stacked along one wall, mostly sound. There was a wheelbarrow with no tire. There was a light fixture with no bulb, and a conduit going nowhere, because the power had been pulled off the pole in 1988. There was a coffee can full of hardware. There was, on the wall by the inner door, a wooden thermometer from a seed company with the needle sitting at 41 degrees. 41 degrees. Outside, it was 11. That was the whole argument, right there on a nail, and it was worth everything we'd done to get to it. Trina got the doors squared and hung a moving blanket in the gap. Lyle spent 2 days on the stove, setting it on cinder blocks with the pipe going up into the near vent shaft, and I helped and understood about 1/3 of what he was doing. He'd been around boilers his whole working life, and he had a thing about draft that came out as superstition. He would not let anybody light it until he was satisfied. He'd hold a candle at the door gap and watch which way it leaned. He made a rule the first night and it never changed. The inner door was never fully closed while the stove was going, and one person was awake, and if anybody woke up with a headache, they said so out loud, immediately, no matter what time it was. That rule saved us. I know it did, because on the 4th night I woke up with a headache and I lay there for a full minute deciding whether it was worth mentioning, because Bev was finally asleep. Then I said it out loud, and Lyle got up in his stocking feet, and he opened the outer door and the inner door and stood there letting 11-degree air into a room we had spent 2 days heating, and we all sat in our bags in the cold and dark for 20 minutes. And he never once said, "I told you so." And in the morning he found where the pipe had frosted over at the top of the shaft. That's what living in it was. Not sieges, draft and damp and dark. The dark was the thing nobody was ready for. There is no window. There is no crack. When the lanterns are off, it is a black that your eyes never adjust to, because there is nothing to adjust to. And after 4 days, I started leaving one flashlight on the crate by the door pointing at the ceiling because I could not sleep otherwise. And that cost us batteries. And I knew it cost us batteries. And I did it anyway for 9 nights. Trina rationed the lanterns without ever calling it rationing. She'd just say, "We're on dark," and everybody would stop what they were doing and go sit. The damp was worse and slower. Concrete under 4 feet of dirt sweats. Everything we owned got a little wetter every day. Socks did not dry. Boots did not dry. We strung line over the stove, and it helped, and it also put all that water into the air, and then the water came out on the walls and ran down. Charmaine got on all of us about our feet like she was still working, and she was right, and I resented it, and she was right. Water we got from a Sandpoint pump in the yard of the old Kowalchuk house, 80 yards off, which Trina primed on the 2nd day using a jug of water we could not afford to lose, and which then worked every single day, and which had to be worked hard because it was iron water and it came up rust orange for the first 30 strokes. It froze twice, and we thawed it twice with a coffee can of coals, which is a thing Lyle knew how to do, and I did not. That pump is the reason we lived out there, and it has never once appeared in a single thought I've had about that winter until I sat down to tell it in order. Firewood was willow and box elder and a dead ash on the fence line, and it was all wet, and it all had to be cut and hauled and stacked inside for 2 days before it would burn worth anything. And cutting it is where the danger was. Not out on the road, not in the dark. 2 people with a chainsaw and a bow saw, and no doctor within, well, there was no number for that. There was no distance you could name at the end of that sentence. That's what changed about the world. Not the ones who were sick. The fact that a saw glancing off a frozen limb had become, in about 19 days, the same category of event as a heart attack. Which brings me to Bev's hand. It had looked bad on Thursday and better on Sunday, and then we moved out there and she used it, because you cannot ask that woman not to use a hand. By the second night in the potato house, the cut had gone tight and shiny, and there was a red line running up her wrist that you could see by lantern light. And she had a fever, and she was doing the thing that people of that generation do, which is to be extremely cheerful about it. Charmaine came and got me outside in the dark and said, "That's cellulitis. She needs antibiotics." "Where?" "I know a house." The client's name was Alma. She was one of Charmaine's, out on the far side of Ditch 14, 4.5 miles by the grade and then the county road. Alma had a shoebox. Everybody out there has the shoebox with every prescription she'd been given in 9 years. And Charmaine had spent 6 years cleaning out that box every quarter, and Alma had spent 6 years putting things back into it. I said we should all go. Trina said 2 people, minimum, and one of them had to be her, and Lyle said somebody had to stay with the stove and Bev. Charmaine went alone at 4 in the morning on the 28th and came back at 2 in the afternoon, and she had a partial bottle of something with a label from 2019 and a name on it that wasn't Alma's. I said, "Where's Alma?" And she said, "In her chair." That's all she said, and she said it flat, and then she sat down on a potato crate and unlaced her boots, and after a while she said, she'd been gone about a week. It wasn't she was just gone, she was 94. Then she said the thing I have never gotten out of my head. She said, "Nobody came. That's the part. Not the sick people. Nobody came. The pills were the wrong ones probably, or the wrong dose, and there weren't enough of them. And Charmaine gave them to Bev on a schedule and soaked the hand twice a day in water as hot as Bev could stand. And after 4 days the red line stopped where it was, and after 6 it started going back. Bev has never gotten full feeling back in 2 fingers, and she says it's arthritis. And it isn't. That was the last thing that went well by luck. We had visitors twice. The first was on the 2nd of December, a man alone walking the grade from the east at about 10 in the morning. Trina saw him from the ash tree we'd been cutting, and we all went inside and shut the outer door and stood there, and Lyle held the hatchet, which I remember being furious about in a way I could not have explained, and we listened to a man walk past a bank of dirt with 5 people and a beagle inside it. He didn't stop. He never knew. That's what obscurity is. It isn't a wall. It's just nobody having a reason to turn their head. The second was on the 5th, and it was in the evening, and it was smoke that did it. We burned mostly at night because in that cold, at first light, the smoke out of the vent shaft stood up in a column you could see from the county road 2 miles off. That night the wind quit early and we hadn't adjusted, and at about 7 there was a knock on the steel door. 2 knocks. Then a voice. "I can see your pipe." It was the man who bought my Coleman stove. I recognized him when Trina cracked the door with the lantern, and he recognized me about a half-second later, and neither of us said anything for what felt like a long time. And then he said, "Birch Street." His name was Dwayne. He was maybe 45, and he'd been out at a fish house on a lake 15 miles north with his brother-in-law and the 2 other people, and the brother-in-law had gotten sick, and Dwayne had walked out. He'd been 3 days walking and sleeping in outbuildings, and he had my $4 stove and one of my dollar tarps in a pack frame on his back, and he had 4 cans of beans and a 2/3 full bottle of white gas and no matches that worked. We let him in. It was not a vote, and it should have been. I said, "Come in," and Trina moved so he could get past her, and that was that. And Bev, who had every reason to be the hardest person in that room, got up and moved her bag over. He stayed 2 nights. He fixed the wheelbarrow. He told us that the reception point in Thief River had stopped taking people on the 28th, and that there was a National Guard element at the junction of 32 and 89 turning traffic. And he said the thing that everybody who came in from anywhere said that winter, which was that it wasn't as bad as you'd think in some places, and it was worse than you could stand in others, and there was no way to know which one you were driving into. On the second morning, he asked if he could stay, and we said no. I want to be precise. Trina said, "We've got food into February for 5. And Dwayne, who was not a fool, said, "Yeah," and looked at the ceiling for a second and said, "My brother's in Karlstad." He left the 2 wool blankets. He put them on the crate by the door, and I didn't see him do it, and I didn't notice until he'd been gone an hour. And I went out and stood on the grade and looked west at nothing, at flat white bog and willow, and a line of dark tamarack 4 miles off, and I could not see him. He'd been gone an hour, and the country had already taken him. Ione had charged me $6 for those blankets, and would not take 20. Dwayne bought them from me for $3 each and gave them back for nothing. I have never worked out what the moral of that is. I don't think there is one. I think it's just what people are actually like, in about the proportions you'd expect, and it does not save anybody by itself. On the 11th of December, I found the numbers on the wall. I was moving crates to get at the sound part of the back wall, and my flashlight went across the concrete at an angle, and there was writing on it in carpenter's pencil. A column of it, faded but perfectly legible where the wall had stayed dry. Years and inches. April 74, 6 April 75, 4 April 77, 11 April 79, 22 May 79. 1422 inches of water in April of 1979. And under that, the same hand, harder pressed. Done. I sat down on a crate with the flashlight in my lap. Wendell had told me. He'd set it on a sidewalk in front of the care home with the wind coming across the parking lot, in the second sentence of 3. And I had taken the sentence I wanted and let the other 2 go past me like they were weather. I brought the flashlight over and showed Trina. She looked at it for about 4 seconds and said, "Yeah." "You knew?" She pointed the light at the side wall, at about the height of my knee, where there was a stain line running the whole length of the room, straight as a chalk snap, with a little crust of mineral on it. "That's a water line, Marv," she said. "I figured you saw it. It's a hole in the ground on a peat bog. Where'd you think the water was going to go?" I had walked past that line 11 times a day for 18 days. She wasn't being cruel. That's the thing. She was a woman who grew up on that ground, and to her it was like pointing out that a roof is pitched. It had never once occurred to her that anybody would look at a concrete box dug into a drained swamp and think it was a permanent solution, because nobody who understood the place would. I told them all that night, and it was the flattest conversation we ever had. Lyle said, "Well, we've got till the frost comes out." Charmaine said, "So March." Trina said, "February, if we get a warm rain." And Bev said, "Then we've got till February," and asked whether anybody wanted the last of the coffee, which we drank about 1/3 as strong as any of us liked. Nobody was shocked. I was the only one in the room who had needed it to be something else. I have gone back and forth about how much of the rest to tell, and I've decided the honest answer is that there isn't much rest, which is its own point. Nothing dramatic happened between the 11th of December and now. We cut wood. We ran the pump. We ate 2 meals a day, and mostly the same too. We got extremely tired of each other in the specific way that 5 adults in a dark room get tired of each other, which is not shouting. It's just knowing exactly how someone is going to clear their throat before they say something. Peanut the beagle died on the 19th of being 14, and we couldn't dig. So we put her in a crate under the slump at the back where it's cold. And Bev cried for about 90 seconds, and then went and split kindling with 1.5 hands. The weather radio still works. That's the strangest thing in my life right now, and it's the thing I'd tell you about if you only let me pick one. Everything else went away in stages. The data, then the calls, then the power, then the county, then the state. And there is still, out of a little plastic box on a wooden crate in a potato cellar, a computer-generated voice reading the forecast for northwest Minnesota every few minutes. all day and all night, to nobody. Temperatures, wind, a hazardous weather outlook for portions of the Red River Valley. We keep it off to save the batteries and turn it on twice a day, and it is how we know what day it is, and it is the only voice from outside that any of us has heard in 3 weeks. 4 days ago, it started talking about a warm front. Above normal temperatures through the extended period, a chance of rain changing to snow, highs in the upper 30s. Upper 30s in the second week of December out here means the top 8 inches of that grade turns to grease and we can't walk out with a sled. It means the ditch pools open up. It means water starts to move under 4 feet of dirt, and it will find the low end of this room the way it found it in 74 and 75 and 77 and 22 inches worth in the spring of 1979 when Wendell Kowalczuk's father sat down on the step and swore and quit. So we have this place for a season. That's what it is. That's all it ever was. Somebody built it to hold potatoes from October to March and then get emptied out before the melt. And it has done exactly that, correctly, for 50 years. And it is doing it for us now. And it is not going to make an exception. I was right that it was out here. I was right in the way that a man with a fever is right when he says the room is too hot. It happened to be true. The reasoning was garbage. Here's the part I'd want Dana to know, if that meant anything, which it doesn't. Charmaine and I were on the woodpile a week ago, and I finally asked her what I'd been not asking for a month, which was why. Why did my wife take a picture of a concrete door on a Tuesday in January of 2006? And Charmaine leaned on the saw and said, because he asked her to. She said that was the whole job, half the time. Old people showing you things. Wendell was proud of it. His dad poured it. There's probably 9 pictures of that door in 9 different shoeboxes in 9 different houses in this county, 'cause he showed everybody. And Dana had a camera in her bag, and she took a picture of whatever anybody wanted her to take a picture of. And she never told me because there was nothing to tell. A man showed her a building. She said it was nice. She wrote nothing on the back because there was nothing on the back. Then Charmaine said she kept a coat in her trunk, a men's coat, extra large, from the thrift store, for if she got to a house and it was cold and there wasn't one. And then, after a while, she paid Alma's propane one time, $90-some. She made me promise not to say. I did not know that. I did not know any of that. 18 years, 240 days a year, and I could not have told you the name of a single one of her clients before this November. And I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to turn that into a lesson about paying attention to your wife, and it is not that. She wasn't hiding. I wasn't cruel. We were 2 people with jobs who talked about the furnace. That's most marriages, and most of them are fine. It's just that when she was gone, I found out that the part of her I had was the smaller part. And then a photograph turned up, and for 2 weeks I let myself believe she'd pointed at something. She didn't point at anything. She stood in the snow in an orange vest at the end of a long day and took a picture to be kind to an old man. And 20 years later it got me and 4 other people through a December. Both of those are true at once, and I have stopped trying to make one of them mean more than the other. The picture's ruined, by the way. I had it propped on the ledge above the inner door for the first 2 weeks. And the damp got into it, and it curled, and the emulsion went milky along the bottom edge, right through where her boots are. I've got it in the inside pocket of my coat now, flat against my chest, which is the only dry place in this room, and won't be dry either, in February. We haven't talked about February. That's not true. We've talked around it about 6 times. Lyle says his cousin's got a place on high ground by Middle River, if his cousin's alive. Trina thinks the Bergstrom people will be gone by then, one way or the other, and she's probably right, and none of us has said out loud what we'd do about that. Charmaine wants to go back into Arvid and see, and Bev says that's the stupidest thing she's ever heard, and she may be right too. What I know is this. Right now it's 14 below outside and 41 degrees where I'm sitting, and the pump works, and there's a rick of dryish ash along the north wall, and Lyle's rule about the door has held for 22 nights running. And every 12 hours we turn on a plastic radio, and a voice that isn't a person tells us how much longer the ground is going to hold.